Hello, greetings, welcome, and good morning. My name is Stony, and I help run the Stoneworks Minecraft server. It is a Minecraft server that, among other things, is focused on world building and history making. So we have towns, nations, wars, religions, roleplay events, all of that fun jazz. It's a ball. And one of the biggest and most important parts of this whole civilization simulator is that we actually keep track of its history really well. So today I'm gonna show you how we do that and how to be an actual video game historian in the awesome events of the Stoneworks Minecraft server. You can join the Stoneworks server today, make a nation, fight wars, write your character lore, and make friends. Just use this IP, play.stoneworks.gg, and check below for the links to our Discord, server store, and awesome server hosts at Argon Hosting. Links are in the description down below. I love you, enjoy the show. Now before I begin, I just want to shout out a fundraiser that a friend from the server is hosting. It's to send medical supplies to an impoverished community in Cambodia. I know it's legit because I contacted the professor that was running it. It's a great cause from some great people. So to start off, I just want to say that I am a history student in college right now, and I just finished a really good class on historiography, the study of how history is actually written, done, and theorized about. So a lot of this will be based on my interpretation of those theories and everything that I learned. You should also like and subscribe, because as a student, I'm also very lonely, and I want more friends to play Minecraft with. So many of you watching this may have seen my other videos, you know, when Minecraft nations went to war over gold resources, the saga of the Cubist prophecy, and there's a bunch others. So let me show you the process for researching and writing these important events. Now, Minecraft history is kinda hard to do because there's very few proper historians researching and writing history in an academic sense like I'm trying to do. When I write a video then, there is very rarely someone who already went in and investigated the truth of an event that happened already. So I need to do a lot of investigating myself to figure out what actually happened and how to write it into a proper story. But this takes a lot of steps. First, usually I make a general timeline of the most important events for the history that I'm writing. For this video, I'll use the example of what's called the Trillium War, the first world war in Stoneworks Minecraft, since I'm currently researching that for a video. When writing a timeline of important events, there are some very important questions to consider at the very beginning. Why am I writing this history? What themes am I focusing on? How am I going to decide if a part of the story is included, vaguely mentioned, or excluded entirely? Real events are not linear step-by-step processes like books and movies show them. They are massive things involving the individual perspectives of crowds of people, which then get tied together in a certain way when we call it the Trillium War or the Cubist prophecy. History is a way of recapturing the past in a way that you can make it understandable in people's minds, but there's a certain cost to that where you have to discard a lot of information and a lot of different narratives that are not essentially tied to what your goal is. Now, pertaining to that, there's multiple kinds of histories, defined by what they choose to focus on. The most common and traditional kind of histories are political histories. They focus on the leaders, the wars, the decisions, the interesting narratives. But later on, you get the development of things like Marxist history, which focus on people's economic and labor incentives, or history of the Annals school, which focuses on making a whole big picture that integrates economics, sociology, military, politics, and geographical history, or even things like Black, queer, and feminist history, which focuses on centering certain groups that are largely excluded from other mainstream narratives. For the Trillium War, though, I'm gonna focus only on the political history. I want to explore the story of the leaders in this world war, how a huge coalition of nations came to war with what's called the Trillium Alliance, and why the main players, being Bardonia, Yimu Audal, Isharia, and the Silver Coalition, were all such big deals in world politics. And finally, to answer the very first question I posed, I'm doing this for the sake of entertainment. In a video, that's my medium, that's what I do. So this history will not be highly analytical or complex or trying to break ground in any way, but instead it'll be a linear story that emphasizes the more dramatic and narrative side of all of these events. You see that there's kind of a sacrifice to be made here in what is in and out of my historical narrative. So first, let me write a very general timeline of some of the most important events of this story. Luckily for us, we have a system for this on our game's wiki. Link in the description, it's really cool. And the system for this is the Chronicles of Rathnir and the Chronicles of Eldom. Every day, we catalog the most important geopolitical and roleplay events, and they get recorded with their dates. I pay a few of my friends in-game to continuously update this page, getting the happenings from the daily announcements that national and religious leaders post in our Discord. This is one of my favorite parts of the Minecraft server. It's a passion project of mine, and let me make clear that the Chronicles are open for anyone to add on to. So long as you don't delete other players' additions, you stay pretty objective and accurate to what actually occurred in-game, and you don't add small frivolous things like you went mining and found a villager named Dave. I personally kept the Chronicles of Rathnir for its first year, so I am fairly confident in my own understanding that these dates for the Trillium War are fairly reliable. Now that I have the preliminary, most important events to structure the story, I need to fill it in with extra information that allows me to see who was involved, how they got into this huge mess, and the most important themes that seem to be brought up over and over in different events. So to do this, I need to go over and read tons of pages of sources that explain what actually happened in this Minecraft World War. And this is where we run into our first real big block for how to write a good history. We need to be very, very critical of the sources that we read. For anyone who wants to get involved in history, our job is to reconstruct the past using information that is available to us, which comes in the form of reading and interpreting certain sources. A source is anything that gives a bit of information from the past. It could be a book, a newspaper, a coin, a fossilized pit of trash. There's a huge diversity in the information about the past that can survive into the present, which we can then interpret and make into historical knowledge. And there's special ways that we can look at and interpret these different types of sources. First, primary sources. Primary sources are items or texts written by people that were actually at the event or time period that we're studying. If we find a sword buried underground in a battlefield, that's a kind of primary source. If we have a letter written by someone who was on the Titanic, that can be a primary source for that. They have first-hand experience with whatever is being studied. Primary sources are pretty much entirely what we're working with in Minecraft history. These are mostly books in-game, Discord messages that we can look at for evidence, wiki articles written by present players, etc. Easily the best primary sources we can get in Minecraft are videos or full recorded replays of events, because then you can actually go through and track what happened thoroughly, and we get a really good understanding of it. That's why I have a playlist of like 200 Minecraft videos from the Stoneworks server alone that are just history. It's my Minecraft history sources playlist. But we do get a few secondary sources, where people look at the primary sources and use those to create a history of their own. Now again, we don't get much of that. Most of the histories that Minecraft players write are primary sources because they're usually focused on the events they witnessed and experienced within their group. Now, there's also tertiary sources, which compile the secondary sources' information and analyses into small summaries, like a textbook would do. And I got into a fight with my professor about this. I think what also counts here are history memes. You heard me, I'll fight you on this too.
El gran Solano López nunca se rinde. Paraguay, mira, somos 3 contra 1. Y Brasil ya no parece muy feliz.
Now obviously, me saying that, not all sources are created equal. So we need to be very, very critical of our sources and try to understand where they will be incorrect about things. First, let's talk about material artifacts. Physical objects that we can interpret information from things like its composition, its creation, its location, that kind of thing. In Minecraft, this could be any leftover structures from the Trillium War, contemporary signs left around towns or ruins, or any pieces of armor or weapons or memorabilia that were kept in museums nowadays. Material artifacts like this generally do not explain things or make complex claims, but through interpretation they do show certain important bits of information. For example, let's look at 3 old bases of the Trillium War. It's clear that the side that built these 3 bases found the vertical strategy successful for their goals, and that they expanded upon it, probably making it more effective in each iteration. Material culture needs to be put heavily into historical context for it to make sense, so one cannot get too much information out of these alone, but it's still very important. Next, we have written testimonies, and this is where things get really complicated. Because people have a lot of control over what they say and how they say it when they're writing things down. They'll export all of their biases, misrememberings, and artistic changes into the source that they write. These textual sources for Stoneworks Minecraft will usually be found in 3 main places: the wiki, the Discord servers, and the game itself. Let's start with the wiki, because it's made for players to record history and lore there. The written sources on the wiki tend to be a mix of primary and secondary sources. Usually players write history wiki pages about the events that they witnessed, primary sources, or about events their group was involved in, and getting the information through asking the players that were involved, secondary sources. But even on a single page, because multiple players can collaborate in dumping all of the information in for one event, it'll be a mixed bag of who adds what. So the wiki is a little tricky to work with, because it can be hard to know who added what parts of the text, where they got that information from, and if that information is verified with other people to make sure it's factual. I'm gonna say that 95% of the time, nobody verifies it with outside sources. So let me give you just a few key guidelines for reading these kinds of textual sources that one should know when trying to do history. First, let's talk about bias. Everyone who writes a source has biases. They like certain things, they don't like other things, and they have motivations for why they would portray an event or person in a certain way. People who are involved in events that they're recording tend to be more biased because they have a personal investment and an emotional connection to that event and its portrayal in a certain way. This means that it's better to have a third-party source, a source written by someone who is neutral or disconnected to the events that happened. However, this does limit the amount of information that the source writer can provide, and this is more likely than not going to be a secondary source, based on interviews, hearsay, all of that kind of thing. But still, there will still be biases in a more neutral source. And again, this is due to what the writer personally experienced with the event, who they talked to, what they believe, and why they're writing their account of the history. And that includes me. I'm generally a neutral source in Minecraft history, but I still have my biases about I want it to be entertaining, I want it to be satisfying, all of that kind of thing. And finally, biases can often create contradictory or competing claims in the historical record. Sources frequently do not agree on key facts or subjects, so you'll have to do a lot of comparison, investigating, and note-keeping to see what is true, what people think is true, what's a bold-faced lie, and what's just plain stupid. To give a good example, let's say that there's a Minecraft war, the Great Golden War, that I already made a video on, and if you watch it, I will kiss you tenderly on your forehead. When one side loses a major war like this, immediately after, there's always the question of why did it go down the way it did? You need someone to blame, you need something to learn for the next time. If you're a rank-and-file soldier on the losing side, you may be inclined to say that the organization and the leadership of your side sucked, especially if you personally witnessed things like bickering, indecisiveness, and bad tactics. It only makes sense, even if indecisiveness and bad tactics were in reality not that important to why the loss happened. If you're a rank-and-file soldier on the winning side, you're probably gonna say that it was because you're super cool and you're really good at fighting and your muscles are huge and you have so so much testosterone and estrogen in your body that you are unresistible. I'm a dork. If you're one of the leaders on the losing side, you might say that the other leaders weren't good, that the rank and file didn't listen to your orders, or that the other side was amazingly good or they cheated and they're a bunch of bitches. Now these claims can all be true at once, or they can all be 100% biased nonsense at once. Sometimes things are just left to pure chance. And one of the real problems is, there's hardly ever a way to pin down what the real truth is. So do you see what I'm getting at? The interpretation of why an event happens in a certain way is heavily dependent on who's writing it down, and where their interest lies in explaining the event in that certain way. People do not accept blame where they don't need to very frequently. That's just my personal experience talking. Maybe people are more respectable than I give them credit for. But they can get away with it, because there's hardly any authority on Stoneworks Minecraft or in real history to say what's actually true and false. So when I'm reading about the Trillium War, I need to be careful of accusations that people are cheating or commanders were incompetent. Bias is a very powerful factor that we have to look at in our sources that are in the historical record. However, if we find multiple sources that agree on particular parts of the story, that is a good indicator that that story part is factual, especially if those sources are coming from different or competing sides that would have independently recorded the same thing. Another factor here is memory. It's decently well known that the human memory is not usually a perfect recounting of things that happened. It's really the brain's attempt to reconstruct events over and over again using relevant information. The problem is that over time the brain loses much of that information, and as we talk about the past with those people around us, the information and language they use can recode and recontextualize our mind's way of thinking about it. So the longer after an event happens, generally the weaker the memory will be of it, especially its minor details and strict timelines. Now that's for an individual person, but it also works on a larger societal level too. If something gets passed down through word of mouth, from person to person by oral retelling, the longer the story is told after the actual event, and the more people that it goes through, the more room you get for the story to be added with poetic, narrative elements, cultural tropes, moral and religious lessons, and changing the story to new social contexts. It's hard to say if this is accidental or purposeful. In my opinion, it's a bit of both. It'll go from a pretty accurate history in its early years and decades after the events to a legend to maybe even mythology, where kernels of truth might be kept, but it's gotten very changed over time. This is a natural thing to happen in all societies, because if you're not working with the modern sensibilities of history, stories changing over time keeps them relevant and important to a society, so that's how they actually stay around. So for both of these cases, the closer that a textual source is written to the event that happened, the more accurate it will tend to be. That's how personal and societal memory factors into this. And lastly, you should be aware that nobody ever has perfect information on everything that goes down in a certain time period, even if they are central to that historical event. In the middle of something historical that's happening, you usually don't have thorough and good explanations of what is actually happening and why. Coronavirus is a great example of that. Just because it's a big thing that's happening and it affects people's lives, there was heated debate over everything like this, and it was very difficult to come to a consensus about what was true. Politics, baby. It's only afterwards that a full story of what happened can really be reconstructed, because when the event plays out and then ends, you see more of what people wanted, how they tried to get it, what things corresponded with what actions, etc. This isn't to say that primary sources that come from during event are useless. No, they do an amazing job at explaining how the source writer would perceive the world around them at that moment. But their stories are going to be pretty small slivers of the actual event, and anyone who tries to make a whole cohesive history of what's currently going on is probably trying to sell you some bullshit. This segues into how I research on Discord. Discord holds nearly all of our chat room discussions about the Minecraft server, and it's amazing for history because almost every message in the game and on our forums is saved and recorded for me to research, because I'm a sleuthy boothy kind of boy. These Discord messages are like a mix of people's attempts to explain whole events, as well as their perspectives during the events, and things that they find funny or ironic in the current situation. If someone asks, for example, why did player Carpicius declare the war between Yimu Audal and Asharia? People will probably give vastly different answers based on what they were told, who they trust, and what they think might be morally right, etc. Carpicius wanted to reclaim the throne of Yimu Audal from Zika Ost, who was trying to usurp it. She was going mad because the chaos goddess Entropy was whispering in her ear, or she just wanted a Minecraft world war because that's an awesome idea. When I do research for Minecraft videos, I spend hours on Discord trying to track down what certain players said during specific time frames, any images or memes that they posted relating to it, or who they were talking to at the time. If you can learn how to properly use the search function on Discord, it's an extremely useful lens into the past. And lastly, for textual research, there are in-game books. Minecraft books here tend to be like wiki articles, but are strictly a source written by one single person. They tend to not be very edited or polished because Minecraft books are notably difficult to write in, so this makes it so that the history that's written down isn't highly revised afterwards. So I like using these. They're kind of raw, but they end up giving a lot of good information. There's whole genres of in-game books that are relevant here. Gameplay guides and manuals, religious theologies, entertainment, treaties, all of this stuff can show specifics about cultures, PvP metas, legal proceedings, religious beliefs, all of that. They're pretty fun to read, and it's why I keep the largest library in the whole server in my Bedrock box. Not to flex or anything, but my Minecraft library is bigger than oh shit. Yeah, karma just got to me immediately. Okay, so that's all the written material, which here is often not very subject to change because people move on to caring about other new events pretty frequently. But still, be careful, know the biases, understand that people's memories are subject to change, keep all of that in your mind, and textual sources are awesome. So now let's talk about interviews. One of the most important ways I get info for Minecraft history is by messaging people on Discord with a bunch of questions to verify and fill in the gaps of the history that I've already read. Having a dynamic conversation about this history will give you a much more detailed account of the minutiae and on-the-ground happenings that these histories involved. It's weirdly difficult to write an accurate story with these low-level accounts, as they inform the actual how things happened in the way that they did. Who said what? Who was where at this certain time? What was your relationship like with these players? That kind of thing. Key events and details that often don't get written into the textual accounts, because whoever wrote those down, it wasn't important for their purposes, but now, if you're trying to recreate the history, it's important for your purposes. It doesn't have to be, but for me it is. But interviews themselves are also kind of tricky. You really need to interview many people from different sides, because people's biases are often pretty strong and unrestricted when you're talking to them. It's easier to verify text that you're writing than the immediate words that come out during an interview. There will be many places where the people that you're interviewing contradict the facts that you've read, or worse, the facts that you found contemporary evidence for. It is your job as a historian to try and determine which one is the truth, or at least show in your history that there are competing claims. I don't like doing this second one because it doesn't make for a good story, but it's really important because oftentimes there's no way to tell who's right. But at the same time, sometimes contradictory facts can be true in different ways. What this means is that if someone tells you something that you don't find true, it's not smart to call bullshit on them and then start distrusting them completely. In my opinion, it's best to engage your interviewee like they're the expert. If something contradictory is said, ask more questions to understand what's behind those claims, and at least entertain it as a possibility that could overwrite your previous narrative. If you don't do that, then you're kind of just interviewing people so that you'll get confirmation that you're already right, even when you're probably not. But again, you need to take into consideration that they will have biases that favor themselves and their groups. But it's still your history. You need to decide what's real, fake, or vague, as well as what's important or side information for your story. I talked to many people during the research for these big Minecraft events, and oftentimes I need to reject their claims outright or try and merge their side with another one in order to make the most logical and consistent narrative. It's honestly work that requires you to be critical, investigatory, and creative. It leaves me exhausted just reading Minecraft histories, and I often joke about that with my friends, like, oh, you guys were doing computer science and coding all day? Yeah, I was reading Minecraft histories. Whew. So that is how one does history, particularly Minecraft history. Make the basic timeline, read the wiki, research the Discord messages, interview several people on competing sides, and finally start drafting up a linear narrative that you can tell, at least if you're doing a video like I do. Genuinely, I have to end up cutting 70-80% of the information that comes my way for a particular narrative. I'll do a whole interview that lasts an hour, and I'll get 2-3 good facts that actually change what I need to do or confirm what I already have. And that amount of info still leads me to writing stories that take half an hour to tell. It's crazy how much information gets dumped into a single topic. And for me, that's genuinely why I love the Stoneworks Minecraft server. It is so complex, and everyone there has such awesome contributions to make to it, even when they don't think they are. Now, I also want to just briefly touch on the topic of history making, which is writing down those primary sources on the wiki. For that, I'll just say, please add your doings to the Chronicles of Rathnir and Eldom. Again, so long as you keep it relatively objective, you don't delete other people's work, but you add a competing point of view next to it. Don't add small things that aren't important, like you found a villager named Dave up on a mountaintop and he was sacrificing a chicken to the god Lux. Also, please do write as many wiki pages on the events that you have as possible. This makes it much easier for us to make videos about you in the future, especially if you add the real players' usernames that are involved, as long as the dates of the events that you describe. So just to summarize how to do history in Minecraft, first you need to know what your purpose, themes, and methodologies are going to be when you set up your historical analysis. Get all sorts of sources, material, textual, and oral interviews, and in these, be sure to compare them all against each other. Try to identify people's biases. Understand that memory is a slippery thing that gets affected by many different things around them, and people by nature do not have perfect information on the historical events that they're part of. These are all why we look at the million different sources to try to suss out what's reality versus fiction versus propaganda. Now, from a personal level, from my soul to your soul, my advice would be, don't get bogged down trying to find the answer to certain questions that are left conspicuously absent in the historical record. If there's no evidence for who did this, what that border looked like, just wing it and try your best, and then if you can confirm your best with anything, great. If not, then 99% of the time people will accept it as just a representation of the history, not the literal 100% truth. But yeah, you heard it here from the history nerd himself first, folks. Remember, if you haven't joined the Minecraft server yet, you really should, because so often people thank me for providing an amazing server. Some people, it gets them back into Minecraft for months on end. I genuinely don't know how thankful I am that people just enjoy playing on this so much. I'm really glad that we all have something that we have in common here. Now, go out, please, again, send some love over to that fundraiser for medkits in Cambodia. It's literally a lifesaver, and you'll be doing a lot of good just by clicking the link in the description. I hope you have an awesome day. Lots of love. See you later.